I get it. You love to go to the bookstore. You love to buy a book, but you don't really read it. You just buy it. Or maybe you start books and get about 30 pages through and then you quit. Or you maybe haven't picked up a book since you were in high school and had to. It is what it is. But if you're interested in reading in the new year, allow me to give you some tips, some advice on how to read more frequently and faster, find books you like, and give you recommendations based on my favorite books that I read this year. Who knows if we have the same taste? Only one way to find out, right? Why aren't you reading? What's the issue? Is it attention span? Because maybe you need something easy, attention-grabbing, gripping, and I have just the one for you for 2 reasons. One, it's incredibly popular right now, so you know that people who don't even normally read are loving it. And 2, once you read it, you're a part of the conversation, and one of the best things about reading a book is having someone that you can talk about it with after you've finished and discuss what you thought about the plot twist, what you thought about the characters, etc, etc. And this is a very TikTok popular book. It's called The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. If you haven't heard of this before, it's the story of a Hollywood starlet, Evelyn Hugo, and she's giving a journalist her tell-all to write a tell-all book once she's gone, and she gives the details on her romances, her fomances, and some juicy little secrets that Hollywood never knew. Has a lot of sex and romance and drama and a plot twist, and it's very easy to get into, and you will love to be able to talk about this with your friends after you read it. I'm sure there's someone in your circle who's already read this book. And if you have read this book and you're looking for more recommendations like this, one of the best things to do is, if you really enjoy a book, find more books by that author. It's very simple. I did that with Eve Babbitt's. I did that with Taylor Jenkins Reid. I found that book so fun to read that I ended up reading 2 more books from her. First one is Daisy Jones and the Six. This is based off of Stevie Nicks and Fleetwood Mac. It's all dialogue interview style, so you can see the pages are all character statements. It's one long interview being conducted, so it's very quick to read. It's very easy, and it has sex, drugs, rock and roll if you want to read about the music industry in the 60s and you're interested in Fleetwood Mac or Stevie Nicks. This is a great little, would you call it a fanfic? That's not the right word, but this is a really quick read, very entertaining. And in this book, I was so embarrassed to be holding on the subway because hardcover books in my head feel way too serious. It feels like you care way too much. I hate this color combo, but the book itself was very good. I liked the stories. It's a newer book, so it's not on paperback yet. This is called Malibu Rising. It's the story of this family of 4 that lives in Malibu. They throw a big party at their house every single year, and it ends up this year in flames. So it's a book that takes place over the course of a day leading up into the actual fire, and there's a lot of drama, very quick and interesting. So the advice of finding a genre or an author you like and running with it, I pulled the author move on Eve Babbitt's and Ottessa Moshfegh. A couple years ago, I read Black Swans by Eve Babbitt. It's a collection of short stories. She's a just an LA baddie in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. She's an it girl, she's a socialite, she has amazing sexcapades, she's smart, she's funny, incredible tits, and it's fun. It's exaggerated nonfiction, it's considered fiction, but it's based off her life, just switched up and exaggerated a little bit. You can look up who she's talking about in most of the cases. I thought this was so fun to read, and I love her writing. I think she, as a person, she fascinates me. So I ended up reading Slow Days Fast Company and getting Sex and Rage. Slow Days Fast Company is the same thing. It's a collection of short stories. This is probably her most popular book, but I honestly preferred Black Swans. I haven't read Sex and Rage yet. It's just on my list and I know I'll love it. Then I read last year, My Year of Rest and Relaxation. This is also incredibly popular. It's the story of a hottie in the Upper East Side who is just done. She's over it. She's like, my parents are dead. My life is miserable. I want to be renewed. I want to just check out for a year. And so she takes a bunch of sleeping pills and attempts that. And it's her journey. It's really funny. It's definitely dark and depressing, but it's really funny, and I loved it so much that I ended up reading Eileen and Homesick for Another World. Eileen is the story of Eileen, who lives in a New England state, I want to say Massachusetts. Her mom has passed and her dad's a drunk, and she's just working at a jail, and then she meets this woman who's just like flamboyant and exciting and and really intrigues her. She hasn't seen someone that interesting in her town in forever, and she kind of just gets obsessed with this woman. Then Homesick for Another World is a book that I read this year. It's a collection of short stories. All of the protagonists in these short stories are incredibly lame, boring, gross individuals that are kind of horny, and I didn't love it, but same energy as the other two, for sure. She's kind of gross, but that's sort of her style, and I like it. So those are 9 book recommendations already. The next reason you might not be reading is you don't have self-discipline. Self-discipline is so sexy, girl. Self-discipline 2022. There's ways that you can discipline yourself to read. I have 3 different strategies. One is associate a place with reading. For me, that's the subway. I know that when I'm going to the subway, I will have a book in hand. I don't even bring AirPods these days because I don't even want to give myself the option. I just like to use my time on the subway as my reading time. I can't remember the last time I went on the subway without a book, and it gets me to read so much. Now, let's say that's not your case. Maybe pick a page number. You want to read 50 pages every single day. I like doing that. You can start off with less, but I like aiming to read 50 pages a day, because if I have a 200-page book, I like to know that I should have it done in 4 or 5 days. Because, you know, things happen. You don't read every single day, but I try to because it makes me feel better. I enjoy it. I think reading is great for the mind, but it's also really great for the self-esteem. Finishing a book and reading a book is such a confidence booster. And then if page numbers are not your thing, maybe a time limit would work better. So set a timer for 30 minutes every single day. I personally don't recommend, if you're not a reader, to start reading before bed, because that's not a great way to read a lot. It's a great way to fall asleep. It's very easy and nice to fall asleep while reading, but you're not gonna get very much reading done. If I read when I'm tired and in bed, I'm reading about 3 pages and then knocking out. So I wouldn't do that. I would do in the morning, during my commute, on my lunch break. You can read on the treadmill, you could listen. That's my next tip. That'll transition us into our next tip, which is find what you like to read on. For me, it's paper. I love to read on paper. I like scribbling, I like holding it. I enjoy an actual physical book. I have friends, they love their Kindle. I have friends who like reading on their phones. It's convenient. They know they'll have their phone with them everywhere. They don't want to have to worry about bringing a physical book with them. And if that's your thing, do it. I just know that I can't read on my phone because I will get distracted. Notifications are the death of me. I can't focus for on my phone. So that's not my thing. Also, if maybe your auditory processing is very strong, or you like to be on the move, or you drive a lot, audiobooks. Get yourself an audiobook. They have them on Amazon, Audible, probably Apple as well. And I find it's a lot slower to finish a book while listening to it. My auditory processing is not very strong, to be honest. I like having the physical words in front of me. The next tip is something that I didn't take into account until later in my reading journey, and that's I'm very picky about my text size and my font choice, my typeface. Let me show you the difference. So this was one of my favorite books to read because look at the pages. Look at these margins. Look at these margins. Look at how much space you have between each line, and look how large the font is. A book like this, I will zoom through so quickly. This, I really wanted to read this probably more than I wanted to read this. And I can't get myself to do it because I hate tiny books. One of my friends loves a tiny book. He loves it, can fit in his pocket. I cannot stand it. And this isn't even that bad, but you know, a lot of the old classics will be these tiny books with incredibly tiny font. And I find that no fun, and I won't do it. Life is too short. You can be picky about the books that you choose. Another thing I think I like so much about the Taylor Jenkins Reid books is I love the spacing. I love it. I love the spacing. It is so easy on the eyes, and that'll probably get you to read more. It definitely gets me to read more. I will not be reading this anytime soon because it seems so undesirable and unapproachable to me, even though Sherlock Holmes is something I am interested in. The next reason you might not be reading is because you read or buy too much of the same genre. You've gotten into the kick of buying too many nonfiction books, and they're chores. They sometimes become chores. Something like Sapiens, which is so incredibly fascinating, is thick and it's dense, and you can't get through more than a few pages to really absorb all the information. You might need to add something spicy to the mix. Throw an Eve Babbitt's in there. Now, I have a friend who loves to go to the bookstore, and she loves a self-help book. She loves one. Loves to buy it, loves to open it, read a page or two, stack it, and then go to the bookstore and buy another one. She's someone who has the hobby of buying books. There's a difference between the hobby of buying a book and the hobby of reading. And I don't think she actually likes to read. I think she just likes to buy books, but you know what? Go off. Something I also like to do is when I read a fiction book, I like to then read a nonfiction book. And when I read a nonfiction book, then I like to read a fiction book. It keeps my brain excited. So those are the different problems I could see arising for why you can't read. If you have another reason that you think you're not reading, leave it in the comments down below and I'll give you the best strategy I can come to think of. Also, if you guys have any good Kickstarter juicy books to get people to read, or the book that got you reading again, leave that in the description box down below because we can all use those. Now, I want to share with you my collection of the favorite books that I read in 2021. Starting off with the book that I finished yesterday, which is The Secret History by Donna Tartt. I loved this. This is a thick book. Don't be fooled. These are incredibly thin pages. I had such a hard time keeping this book in good shape. It's already tattered and this is my first time reading it. It's over 500 pages. So if you're up for the challenge or you really like dark academia, big brain energy fiction novels, something more psychological, a bit of a thriller, this is the story of, well, it's the story of a friend group, but our narrator is Richard. He moves to Vermont to go to college and he ends up entering this very cult-like friend group. One of the friends is murdered. You don't know how, you don't know when, you don't know why, but you know that at the beginning there's a lot of stress because you're waiting at any moment for them to get caught. This book is incredibly well written. I love the prose. It's just, there's so many great nuggets of insight and really poetic ways of putting complicated emotions alongside of just the general great plot of this book. I loved it. I really loved it. Before that, I read A Really Good Day by Ayelet Waldman. I hope I'm saying her name right. And this is how microdosing made a mega difference in my mood, my marriage, and my life. If you are interested, this is on psilocybin, this is on LSD. And to be honest, I was sent this book in PR. I don't know what that says about my brand. And I judged it. I judged this book because I was like, okay, we're gonna read about a middle-aged woman attempting microdosing. Like, what does she know? She was a total square. This is gonna be a really introductory, rudimentary insight into microdosing. I was so wrong. This is jam-packed with so much research. It's her personal narrative, so she microdoses for 30 days. Every single day, she will document her sensations. Then she'll share a personal story and a research study that applies to sort of the thoughts that she's having each day. And she uses the Fadiman method, so it's a microdose day every 3 days. So on the first day you microdose, the second day is a transition day where it's still in your system, and then by day 3 it should just be a normal day, and then you repeat the process again. I learned a lot. I loved it. Then we have a book that I need to give a disclaimer. I have a highlight on my Instagram story of every time I read a book, I rate it, which I really want to stop doing because I looked back and I've rated books that I actually didn't like very high and books that I did like quite low. I gave this an 8 out of 10 and I think this is a total 10 out of 10. And then I rated Attached, which is that attachment style book. I'm sure a lot of you guys have seen it. I gave it a 9 out of 10 and I really hated it. I think back and I'm like, that was not that good. Anyway, I digressed. This is Less. This is by Andrew Sean Greer, and it's the story of Arthur Less. He's about to turn 50 and he receives an invitation to a wedding from a previous lover. And he thought of this lover as someone who was sort of a passing fling, but once receiving the invitation he realizes, was that the love of my life? And he looks at this invitation and he's like, I can't go see the love of my life get married, but I can't not go and sit home and wallow in pity, so I need to do something else to distract me. So he goes all around the world. He goes to a book show in New York and goes to, I think, a public speaking event in Mexico, and then he goes to an award show in Italy or Greece, I think, and he goes to Paris and he goes to India and he goes to Japan, all to distract him, and I think he goes to Morocco to distract him from this wedding. And this is the first book that I've ever read that made me realize something very simple. A book doesn't need to have darkness to have depth. This is not a dark book. It's not a depressing, sad book. It touches on a lot of heartfelt, important ideas that we experience throughout life, but it's not dark. Whereas this book, which was also one of my favorites, this is Factotum by Charles Bukowski. Before you say anything, just let me talk about it and then you can leave your comments because I get it. People hate him because he sucks. Anyway, This book is so dark. This is a very depressing book. It's pathetic, but it's not deep. This book is deep, but it doesn't have darkness, and I thought that they were synonymous. They're not. Less was really good though. I really enjoyed it. I didn't even realize how much I enjoyed it until months after finishing this book. I think about it all the time. It had a much greater impact on me than I expected, which is why I rated it 8 out of 10 instead of 10 out of 10. Hey, it's Editing Lexi. I realized that when I was comparing this to Less, I set it down and never ended up talking about it. This is one of my favorite books of the year. It's by Charles Bukowski, and it's one of the only novels I've ever heard of him. He's a poet. He's crude, he's horny, he's sexist, total misogynist, and dead. But his writing is so impressive. He's so honest. This is the story of, what is our main character's name? Henry. Yeah, and Henry is a drunk who can't keep a job. So we get access into this short period of time where he goes through his life of getting enough money to get himself a drink, and then getting fired, and then getting another job, and getting drunk, and there's women along the way, and there's no plot. It's just a chunk of time, but I was so incredibly entertained. His writing is so good. Yeah, Charles Bukowski. You hate him and you don't read him, or you hate him and you read his stuff. I'm number 2. Next up is another one of my favorites. I loved this one. This is Valley of the Dolls. It was really popular in the 60s, and this was like the book that all the girlies are reading and everyone's talking about. I think that's what this book was 50, 60 years ago, and this follows the tale of 3 women, Anne, Neely, and Jennifer North. I love Jennifer North. She was my favorite. And as they move to New York and live out their dream as stars and actresses and singers, you're following them for probably a decade or two, and you really get to know them. There's so many stories within this one book. As I was reading it, I kind of thought I figured out the arch and I knew where the book was gonna go, but before that story finished, you get another one and another one, and there's so much to this book, and you really get their life story. The ending, not happy about the ending, but the entire book I really, really loved. The next book I loved this year is Essentialism. This is a non-fiction actionable step book to teach you time management and how to find a priority. There's a lot of graphics in this book, which are kind of corny, but I love it. Like don't tell me how I know that this is on page 6, but this is a great example of what it teaches you. This is how I felt. I felt like this was my energy, and it was going all these different places but kind of going nowhere, when I could just pick one thing and have my energy go really far. And that's what this book taught me. It helped me figure out that I want to prioritize my vlogs and my podcast. So I underlined so much of this. This is a really helpful self-help book in my opinion, because it's not conceptual. Don't get me wrong, I love a conceptual self-help book. I think. Maybe I like one. I don't know. I can't even really think of one right now. I've been off the self-help book train for a minute now, but I did like this one because it really gave actionable steps to figure out what I need to do moving forward, and I loved it. I loved it. So if you have poor time management, or you're a yes man and you spread yourself too thin and you're actually not doing anything that you want to because you're getting so distracted by the noise around you, this is your book. I will link all these books down below. And my final favorite book of this year is Conversations with Friends. This is by Sally Rooney. It's the first and only book I read from her. I know a lot of people are huge fans of Sally Rooney. She's an Irish writer, and this follows the story of 2 girls that were previously girlfriends but now just best friends, and they run into this couple, this older couple, and they end up sort of getting entangled with them. There's a little bit of cheating and affairs that go on, and it's juicy and it's sexy, and it's a really fast, entertaining read, and I think that's what a lot of us need sometimes. Not too deep, but deep enough, and I loved it. I loved all the books I read this year. I did read some horrible books, some books I really just never want to touch again, but these 7, I loved them. There's 2 more things I wanted to share. One is that this is probably the most I've read in years. And what's interesting is when you're reading back to back to back, it's hard sometimes to go from finishing a book by one author to reading a new book by a different author, because you realize after you've spent 100, 200, 300 pages reading a certain writing style that throws you off a little bit. My last tip that I wanted to share is that the way that I motivate myself a lot of times to finish books, if I'm about halfway or 3/4 of the way through a book, that's when I go to the bookstore. That's when I purchase my next book or find my next book or acquire it somehow. A lot of my books, this was found on a stoop. This one was given in PR. This was also found on the street. These two were given from PR. This was found on the street. This one I bought. This one's my roommate. So you know what? You just acquire books however you do. But what I'm saying is that it's really nice as a motivating factor to have your mind excited about your next book to help you finish the current read. So if you guys have any other reading tips, any book recommendations, or any problems that you're having getting yourself to actually read, leave those in the comments down below. I'm not an expert, but I'm here to help. I want you guys to read in 2022. It's such a healthy way to pass the time. It's a great hobby. It keeps your mind interesting, it keeps you entertained, and it's really a confidence booster. So it's done a lot for me this year. I've had a great year of reading, and I've never made a book related video before. Give this a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. Let me know if you want any more book related content, or if this is a one and done situation. I personally love books, but I don't know how much of my current audience does because I'm typically a vlogger. If this is your first video of mine, or if you enjoyed it and want to see more content, subscribe, and I will see you all very soon. Thanks for watching. Take care. XOXO, Lexi.